With the NFL trade deadline fast approaching, who are some of the big-name players who could be on the move? All eyes will certainly be focused on whether Deshaun Watson changes teams. And there's a lot that comes with any Watson deal from a potential legal standpoint. And the Texans haven't appeared to budge from their sky-high asking price either.
You're looking at having to make a huge decision as to not having that additional clarity, but potentially looking at a quarterback who is 26 years old and thinking, you know what, at some point this is going to be resolved and adjudicated, and you know you're going to have Deshaun Watson potentially from that point moving forward.
As for other players who could have a big impact down the stretch, Dolphins cornerback Xavier Howard has led the league in interceptions 2 of the past 3 seasons and would most likely benefit from a change in scenery. Then there's the case of Odell Beckham Jr. in Cleveland. His stats have decreased sharply from his days with the Giants and is being used more as a decoy than a deep play threat with the Browns. Speaking of wideouts, Allen Robinson has been a model of consistency for Chicago, but would the Bears be willing to take away Justin Fields' best weapon when he's already struggling to put consistent performances together? Fletcher Cox would likely make a difference on any defensive front and recently had choice words for Eagles defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon for having a passive scheme. Will any of these players move to a contender who's one piece away from making a run at the Super Bowl? We're about to find out.
All right, time now to welcome in senior NFL writer Jonathan Jones with us here on HQ with more on this. And the trade deadline, of course, coming on Tuesday. And somehow the same story, the top story, Deshaun Watson wanting out of Houston, JJ. We've been talking about this for months. Texans and the Dolphins have been doing this two-step for quite some time. Are we getting closer to Deshaun Watson getting his wish?
No, I don't think so. I had reported on CBSSports.com earlier this week that talks between Houston and Miami had been pretty close to non-existent lately, and so both sides have sort of retreated back to their corners, and I will neither be surprised if Deshaun Watson remains a Houston Texan or if this deal gets done where Deshaun Watson is traded to Miami. I would be surprised if he is sent anywhere else by the Tuesday 4 p.m. deadline, but speaking with someone, a league source, if you will, I said, hey, if you were a betting person, would you wager, and this was earlier today, would you wager that Deshaun Watson were a Houston Texan by Tuesday at 4:01 p.m. Eastern, or not a Houston Texan? And they said a Houston Texan. So the Texans are not coming down off of their price. It's difficult to sort of tell really what is misinformation coming out of Houston. There's been a lot of it in the past week plus, for no apparent reason other than to disseminate misinformation out of Houston, but that's the way things work down there apparently right now. And so Miami, we heard Brian Flores, the head coach today, come out and say Tua is our quarterback, leaving himself a little wiggle room if you wanted to parse words, but ultimately saying that Tua was their quarterback barring any sort of injury. The Carolina Panthers have pulled out of the Deshaun Watson running. However, as I reported earlier this week, if Sam Darnold is to lay yet another egg this week, perhaps they become reinterested in Deshaun Watson, though that seems unlikely. So, again, will not be surprised if he is a Miami Dolphin. Will not be surprised if he's a Houston Texan come Tuesday at 4:01 p.m. Eastern. I would be surprised if Deshaun Watson is not one of those two things by 4:01 p.m. Eastern.
Miami, one of the places he wants to go. They're 1-6, and the closer we get to that trade deadline, chances, Brian Flores, the way the season has gone, we thought we were going to see a playoff team. That's not the case. Are they sellers come Tuesday?
They should be. Their season's going nowhere in a hurry. They're 1-6 and about to be 1-7 once they lose and probably get throttled by the Buffalo Bills, when that Bills pass rush is going to be all over Tua Tagovailoa in 2.3 or so seconds on half of his dropbacks, like they were in their Week 2 matchup before they knocked him out of the game and they had to go to Jacoby Brissett. So you look at the Miami Dolphins, maybe Emmanuel Ogbah, who's going to be a free agent in 2022, or are they going to be able to afford him in the offseason? Or will some other team offer him more money? Do you try to get something out of him right now? You look at a Will Fuller, for example, but he has a finger injury. He's not ready to play, so is a team going to actually give up some sort of compensation for him when he's had some injury issues lately? You look at Xavier Howard. They redid his deal. He's a top corner in the league. perhaps they could send him off somewhere. Folks that I spoke to would not at all be surprised if Xavier Howard were ultimately shipped off if the Miami Dolphins decide to be sellers at this trade deadline. But you have sort of a crisis of thought on where this team is within that building. Can they compete? Can they compete now? Maybe not in 2021, but do they want to keep so many of their fantastic parts here or try to get what they can for them? And Brandon, I'll tell you this about just this year's trade deadline in general. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic that put such a stress on so many teams' cap situations, so many of these teams, if they have a player who they would like to trade, and so many of these teams who maybe want to trade for a player, they have restructured their deals so that there's so much money that's been pushed forward into 2022 and 2023. And so that makes it more difficult to trade for that player, knowing that those sort of payments are going to be coming up pretty soon when they kick the can down the road. And then along with that, if you want that team, that current team that has that player, to absorb some of that money, well, you're going to have to give up a higher draft pick and compensation in order to acquire that player. And so it's a unique set of circumstances that have been brought on by this sort of cap crunch that we've been experiencing now for the last 18 or so months that make it very, very difficult this year in particular to have such a wild and crazy trade deadline like we have been trending toward the last couple of years.
Interesting to see how that pans out. As you mentioned, we get closer to Tuesday. Elsewhere, JJ, we're just a few weeks away from John Gruden's resignation as the head coach of the Raiders. This week, owner Mark Davis calling for a written report from the Washington football team's investigation for those emails. What more can you tell us about that situation kind of brewing here?
Yeah, I was at the owners' meetings here in New York earlier this week and saw so many of NFL team owners walking through the lobby at the Intercontinental Hotel with their heads down and sort of avoiding or ignoring or politely declining comment to reporters. Jerry Jones stopped for a moment. The one guy who sat down with his backpack on and his white Raiders starter jacket in a chair and said, yeah, you guys come on over. The cameras, sit back just a little bit, give me some space, but we're going to talk. It was Mark Davis, the Raiders owner, and he had something to say. And obviously he feels wronged by the NFL because they had the possession of the John Gruden emails dating back to June or July. And he has felt and has expressed pretty passionately in a number of ways and a number of times that he wishes that the Raiders would have been able to get their hands on those emails sooner rather than later, that he wouldn't have had to hear from a reporter about these emails, that the league could have sent them earlier, that he could have made the decision, of course, before all of this came out. Now, no one is saying it out loud, and Washington football team and their representation, including the co-CEO Tanya Snyder, Dan Snyder's wife, reportedly said in those closed-door meetings, hey, we didn't leak the emails, but you start to have this process of elimination where you realize the NFL very likely didn't leak the emails. You look at it and, okay, who has access to the email? The investigator's office? Well, that doesn't seem like that would happen. The Washington football team, Dan Snyder, his representation, they would have likely had access to a number of those emails, and they did, according to court filings that they had over the summer. So did they. So the Washington football team and its representatives felt compelled this week to say, no, it wasn't us. I'm not entirely sure many in the room believed them. I know many outside of that room do not believe them. But Mark Davis certainly wishes that those emails had been brought to his attention, and I think in part because of that, and also because he wants to see the NFL do the right thing and do right by these accusers. He wants to see a public written report on the Washington football team after a 10-month investigation where the NFL accepted simply an oral report. He agrees with the women who showed up at the hotel saying that they wanted this, and he was the one owner who did speak up saying that he wanted it. I don't think that we're going to get it. Congress is hoping to get those documents by November 4th from the NFL. I don't know if Congress is going to get those documents just by a simple request. It may have to be through the power of a subpoena that the NFL is not hoping for, but probably waiting for.
Sounds like more pieces of the puzzle that we're going to be waiting on for quite some time there as you just broke that down. Jonathan Jones, appreciate your time as always, tapping in on the NFL here on HQ. Don't forget, Sunday, full slate of games starting at 1 o'clock. Steelers at the Browns, and Baker Mayfield will play against Pittsburgh. Of course, missing that last game, followed by the Bengals at Jets. Joe Burrow's been hot. Then at 4 p.m., the Patriots traveling to the Chargers. You can catch that on CBS and also streaming on Paramount+.